this time I was doing all the conventional stuff, running 5 days a week, working out like a madman with weights and getting hurt and doing all the things. And my boss was kind of sick and tired of hearing me talk about all this stuff and said, you know, Adam, I hear you proselytizing about exercise and doing this, you got to do this and do this. He says, you know, I got to tell you, given all the exercise that you're doing, I have to say, you look like shit. And he's like, you know, if that's what exercise is about, you can have it. I'm not interested. He says, because it seems like it's doing more harm than good for you. And of course I was like, you know, typical statement from somebody that doesn't like to exercise. And I moved on. But I had such respect for my boss and his intelligence that even long after I was out of the research industry, that stayed with me. That stayed with me. Like, if what good is exercise if it's going to undermine your health in the long run, you know? And he had a good point. And being a trained scientist, like I can't just dismiss a skeptical question like that, you know? As Richard Feynman says, the physicist, Nobel Prize-winning physicist, said, if there's an exception in science, if there's an exception to the rule is wrong. And I said to myself, maybe there is a better way, but I didn't know if there was or not, because at the time I didn't know how to find a better way. And then I read and I come across Ken Hutchins' book on Super Slow. And what happened was the comment that my boss had made years earlier and the screeds of Ken Hutchins, boom, the epiphany occurred. And I was like, oh my God, that's the answer. There is a way of working out intensely and hard and not undermine your health in the process.
When did this epiphany occur? What kind of period was this spent? Time?
This was back, well, I started the business in '97. This is a couple of years before that. So a couple of years before that, I read Hutchins' book. I started working for a personal training center in my neighborhood, of all places, that had just also adopted Ken Hutchins' ideas. I mean, talk about fortune and serendipity.
So you jumped from the lab, or the research.
There was no. I left the lab and I started selling. I was selling medical equipment for a while.
Yeah.
Trying to find myself, quite honestly. And then personal training was always an idea for me. But I didn't want to just be a personal trainer. You know, I needed to have a hook, if you will. You know, maybe research. I didn't know really, but I was always into exercise ever since I was a kid. And even though my boss told me what he told me, I still exercised, and But it was interesting. My purpose of exercising was purely to become a better athlete and to be good at my sport. So I kind of had the right idea.
What was your sport?
Baseball, swimming. That's what I did in college. But I also, afterwards, I just continued sports. I did some triathlons for a while. I was playing in softball leagues. You know, just an active life. I was doing a lot of biking. I loved biking.
And you had this mental epiphany. Was it as instant when that moment happened for you to transition from 5 days a week to whatever you ended
that's a good question. I was already at the time doing high intensity training.
Would that have been a Nautilus?
Well, right. I had a family friend who I met at dinner one night. He was a son, actually, of my parents' very good friends, and he was telling me about high intensity training. That was my first entree into high intensity training. So here I am. My boss tells me, just to give you the chronology again, my boss tells me what he tells me. I leave the lab a year later. I'm selling medical equipment. We have Thanksgiving dinner. This guy comes over to the house, right? He tells me about high intensity training. He becomes my trainer. He tells me all about Arthur Jones. I read the bulletins. I'm totally into high intensity training. I meet Dr. Ken Leisner, all right, the high intensity guru also. And I worked out with Ken Leisner for a while. So I really got deep into all of a sudden high intensity training. There was still this high force, high impact kind of aspect to this type of training. I got seriously hurt doing deadlifts during this period of time. And then I come across Ken Hutchins' book. And then that's when I switched completely at that point. And I worked for this place on Long Island, that was actually doing it. So I kept my day job and I worked nights and mornings at the lab, at the training facility, learning the skill of training people in high intensity and learning the super slow technique. I got certified by Ken Hutchins and some of his, original proteges, and a year or so later, in '97, I decided to open up my own place in a small little basement that smelled like cigarette smoke in a very blue-collar area of Long Island, where I didn't live, so I didn't know anybody in this area. So everybody came from the North Shore, came down to where I lived, and I started my business that way. Started with 5 pieces of equipment that another super slow guy kind of sold to me.
Yeah.
That he had retrofitted, and that was the beginning.
And that was on Long Island.
That was on Long Island. Yeah.
When did you make the move to Manhattan, to where we are today?
So here I am. I'm like so excited about this technique. Everybody should know about it. I figure, let me just let the press know about it, and I started writing letters to all the press. I didn't hire a publicist or anything like that. I literally went to, there was a bodega across the street from me, and they have all the magazines and newspapers, and I just bought all of them, and I brought them back to my studio across the street. I started going to the mastheads, finding out who the editors of each publication was, and I typed a letter and mailed it regular mail. There's no email in '97 around '97. And I literally snail mailed all these, about 50 letters to about 50 publications. And not a single person or publication responded, except for one, the New York Times.
Perfect.
My career has been like a series of serendipitous kind of experiences. Like first, when I just hear about Ken Hutchins and Super Slow, it turns out that this personal training gym down the street from where I work happened to be doing Super Slow.
Yeah. And
then I send out these press releases that I wrote myself. Nobody responds except for the New York Times. It was kind of like, what the hell? And they came to my little dingy basement, took a picture of me, interviewed me over the phone, and boom, I get this full-page article on the cover.
Fantastic.
The cover of the Science Times of the New York Times. This is a funny thing, I get hundreds of calls from the article. Every single call came from New York City, Manhattan. Now, my place is on Long Island. I didn't get a single call from anyone on Long Island. And I'm wondering, does anybody on Long Island read the New York Times? Because I didn't get a single call. So I take everyone's name down. I had a whole list of names, like, here, give me a name and number. I'm opening up in Manhattan in 6 months. Do you have a place in Manhattan? I'm like, yes, we're opening up soon. Which was a lie. I just took their names down and their phone numbers. At the same time, between phone calls, I'm calling up brokers, find me space in Manhattan. And we're sitting in that space right now, actually.
Wow.
So within 6 months, I did get a place open.
What year was that then?
That was 99.
Okay, so a really quick transition from
within
Long
2
Island
years of starting. I can speculate that maybe people in New York City are just so time stressed, and maybe they have the money. Personal training was more of I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that I had a lot of names and phone numbers, and it was worth giving it a shot. I took a flyer, and I rented a small space. This is an expanded version of my original space. I took a small space, and then I called everybody up. Said, we're opening. And I think I had about 120 names, give or take. And out of the 120 that I called 6 months later, about 20 or 30 people started with me, which is enough to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And I had my Long Island location. That dingy basement was actually throwing off a lot of money to me. So I was able to supplement the losses originally in my New York City location by the success of my Long Island location.
So despite the fact that nobody called from the promo piece from Long Island was a flourishing gym. It was
Absolutely.
working.
Oh yeah. Long Island quickly. I don't know. Everyone asked me how I did that too, because there's no internet, no way of marketing that way. I was just so obsessed with this paradigm shift and thinking about exercise that I just became this crazy evangelical preacher of this idea. And I refuse to have anyone say no, in a way, I guess. I mean, people coming from all over Long Island to work out with me. I mean, they were telling their friends, and it was a real novelty at the time. And a lot of my clients, I made them feel, not that I manipulated them, but I was so passionate about this, that they became believers, even if they didn't really quite understand everything I was saying. They were just like, this is a smart guy, and he's tried everything, and now he's doing this. Like, I just believe him. I'm just going to do it. And it feels good, and it's quick. And I'm feeling good, and and that's what ended up happening. People just seeing the results, and they're feeling, and then word of mouth spread like wildfire on Long Island, you know, and that's how it started. So it didn't take long for me to be 50, 60 clients a week on Long Island. Maybe within 3 or 4 months of me opening up the place, I was training 50, 60 people. No, I was born and raised there, right? So I had a nice network of friends and stuff like that. So that helped.
Yeah. When did you start writing that? What inspired you to start writing Power of 10?
After the New York, I was asked to write the book, actually. I mean, I got an article in Newsweek magazine. So after my initial New York Times thing, then I said to myself, oh, that was pretty easy. Send out some press release and the New York Times called you. So when I opened up this place, I said, let me do that again. So I wrote all these press releases again, and I sent it out again. Just a little bit different, maybe a different editor here and there. I don't know. I just changed it up a little bit. I sent them all out again, and nobody responded again except for one magazine, Newsweek magazine, which at the time was a major magazine. You know, magazines have changed a lot in the last 21 years. But back then, Newsweek magazine was like Newsweek and Time magazine were the two most read business periodicals in the country, probably. Don't quote me on that, but they were definitely up there. And here I am doing an article, a full-page article now, a multi-page article in Newsweek magazine. And then I got a book deal offer after that came out. That's when I got celebrity clients and book deal, and I got so I wasn't planning on writing a book until I was offered a book deal. I'm like, yeah, well. Matter of fact, it's funny. I was offered the book deal. I was sitting in this big conference room, and you have all these marketing people and editors, you know, and they're kind of they're interviewing me, and they said, so what do you think? You want to do a book? I was like, I don't know. I don't know if a book would work. I'm actually not. I was just saying, you need a trainer, and you need to understand, and like, I don't know if you can do this on your own, you know. I said, I guess we can talk about the principles of it, but in reality, I think in order to do this right, you really need a trainer, and you need my special, because I was so proud of my equipment and the retrofits and everything like that. I was actually selling them off the idea of writing a book, which is actually crazy. But I was being honest, number one. And number two, as it turns out, my skepticism fueled them wanting me more. They're like, no, we can work around that, we can work around that. They kind of thought that was interesting, that I was kind of not trying to oversell them on the idea of a book. And they ended up selling me on the idea of a book. I said, yeah, okay, I can talk about the principles of it. I can put a home routine together, and that's how that happened.
You touched on something else then, that we're going to do a walk through, hopefully with the camera around your gym, and then just show some of it off a little bit later on. But you